Well, today's something else. I would like to tell you about a trip my wife and I took to Russia in 2003. It was a Russian river cruise from St. Petersburg to Moscow. Originally, we had planned on traveling with Cosmos, an American tour company that handled these kind of trips. However, I wanted to attend a class meeting, a reunion, in Germany, and time-wise there was a conflict. It just didn't work. Somebody suggested I ought to get in touch with the German company, which I did, and I found out that the same tour could be had with the German company. Since I speak German and my wife speaks German fluently, we had no problem with that. So we thought it would be interesting anyway, because of the fact that Germany and Russia did not exactly have a very nice relationship during the war, and we would like to see how they would treat us as Germans. So we applied for this tour, paid for it, and started out in Kennedy. My daughter lives in New York. She took us to the airport. We said goodbye at the airport. We took Alitalia. The reason was strictly price. It was a cheaper tour. We had to go via Italy to Berlin. And then we arrived in Berlin at Tempelhof Airport, which is the main international airport. From there we had to take a subway to get to Schönefeld, which is just outside of Berlin. It's still a rundown airport, at least it was at that time, because the Russians had originally occupied that particular area. And we boarded our Russian Tupolev aircraft. It was a double-decker, a huge airplane. You entered via a very kind of crummy staircase on the bottom. You went right past the running engines, jet engines, so you might have been afraid of getting sucked in, which fortunately didn't happen. We walked into the first level, and then inside we had to climb another set of stairs to get to the main floor, where we sat down very comfortably, and the service was excellent. We had a young girl sitting next to us. She came from Novosibirsk, visiting relatives in St. Petersburg, and was eventually going to go back. We had a chance to talk and exchanged addresses. When we arrived in St. Petersburg, we were received, or except we had Ludmila come in as the agent from the travel agency. She is a Russian woman, spoke German fluently, and she was taking us under her wings and brought us to a tour bus. This tour bus had a few people outside, 3 or 4 people with a little band, with a trumpet and I don't know, a harmonica or something, and a violin, and they played, of all things, the German national anthem, which kind of made it look a little bit creepy. I mean, it's been a long time, but they seem to have gotten over everything pretty well, and it was a very nice reception. I guess there were a couple of extra tips expected. Well, she took us to our ship. Now, the ship was a cruise ship, but it was not anything like the Caribbean cruise ships, not anywhere near that size. It was much, much smaller, because these ships had to go through, in our case, 16 locks, and they had to have a certain width and a certain depth in order to be able to do this. So the ship took a total of 230 passengers. The name of the ship was Mikhail Goroshev, or something of that nature. It sounded very similar to that. And the 230 passengers, by the way, 30 of them were Japanese. They didn't speak a word of English or German. 100 of them were Seventh-day Adventists, and I wasn't particularly crazy about this bunch, but it turned out they were pretty nice. And the rest of them were just regular run-of-the-mill Germans. We entered the ship, and we got a very nice reception by some girls dressed in their costumes, their local costumes, and they followed the Russian custom of giving you some bread when you arrived as a guest. This bread was sweet bread. It was very, very nice with the raisins, and it tasted wonderful. We had a chance to in the evening. We first checked out our room, and our cabin was wonderful. It was very small, but everything was there. There was a television set for announcements, I believe, or maybe I'm confusing it with another ship. But anyway, it wouldn't have been necessary anyway. The room was nice and comfortable, and we had a shower in there. And in the evening, we went out to the stern of the ship, and we looked over the city of St. Petersburg at night. It was just a very, very beautiful sight. Now, as you probably know, Peter the Great was the one who founded St. Petersburg, and this was back in the 15th century. And he sort of copied it a little bit from Versailles. Of course, everything had to be big and everything had to be ostentatious. But that's what all the kings and all the potentates did in Europe in those days. Never mind the money, never mind where it comes from. There are enough peasants that can earn it, and this was the attitude at the time. Well, we had a good night's sleep, and in the morning we had to get up fairly early. We had a wonderful breakfast, served beautifully with tablecloths and cloth napkins, and it was really first class. Then we went to Tsarskoye or something like that. It was a palace. It was one of the summer palaces of the Tsar, and very, very elaborate. And when you see the gate and you see the rest of the palace, you'll be very, very well impressed. And of course, before you get into the palace, there were vendors, and there were always vendors. No matter where you went in Russia, you saw vendors on the side of the street. And the reason for that is that people were being paid very poorly in Russia, and they had to get any kind of extra money they could. For instance, a doctor and a teacher would get paid less than a mechanic, and these people had to earn some extra income, and that's what they did. Now, when we got to the palace, the first thing they asked us to do was to put some booties over our shoes, and you can see my wife putting on her booties. And the shoes were to protect this wonderful floor, and when you see where she put on her shoes, there was linoleum, but of course that was not the real floor. It was just the anteroom. Later on, it was an elaborate parquet floor, and it was beautiful. And we came into a huge hall. You can see all the gold on the sides and on the ceiling. And guess who was visiting at that time? There was a special reception for Mrs. Barbara Bush, George's mother. She came, and of course she got a special tour of the place. And you can see there's a cabinet with a chess game in it. The chess game is made of precious stones, very, very expensive, I'm sure. And all the furnishings in the palace, you can see there's a sample of a couch that I'm showing, and you see dinner plates, and they are all Meissen porcelain, the best of that you can possibly have. And then we got to the amber room. Now, the amber room is a room that's entirely made of amber, and it was disappeared during World War II. What happened to it, nobody knows. It is still disappeared, and, well, anyway, this amber room has never been found, and they're still looking for it. So the Russians actually recreated the amber room from scratch with real amber. Very expensive proposition. They made designs into flowers and all sorts of other things. Then after we had seen that, we went to the Hermitage. Now, the Hermitage used to be the Winter Palace, and it's now a very famous museum. It's absolutely on a par with the Louvre in Paris. There are paintings by Rubens, by Leonardo, by Rembrandt, Gauguin, Picasso, you name it. There's just no end to it. You would need, the guide told us, you would need about 2 months solid to just about see everything, and we had 2 hours, of which we had to line up for 1 hour, so really we only got to see a tiny little bit. And you can see there's one painting that I show, and the royal carriage is in there as well. There's a museum there, and then there's a museum store, and in the museum store I saw a cap of a Russian officer, a Russian army cap, and I was intrigued by it, so I tried it on. And then there were a lot of Limoges papier-mâché boxes. You know, these boxes are very intricately done, and they're extremely expensive. And after this excursion, we spent the afternoon in Peterhof. Peterhof was another palace of the Tsar. It was a summer palace where he and his family spent most of their time. It has a bit of a personal touch to it as far as my family is concerned, because my mother used to spend her holidays in the summer with her two sisters and her mother at Peterhof, at the palace, and they lived in a house nearby, or in a house that was built for guests. And my great grandmother was a confidant of the old Tsarina, not the latest one, but the old one, and that's how come they were there. So there were some pictures taken by my grandmother. One of them was a picture of the palace, how it was 100 years ago when she took the picture, and then there's the picture how it is looking today. And I also have a little picture of the royal family. This is the last royal family, the one that was murdered by the Bolsheviks. Nicholas is the Tsar, and Tsarina is there as well, and the daughters, and the son. The son was a hemophiliac. He had a bleeding disease, and probably know the story about Rasputin, the monk, rather shady character, who became a trusted confidant of the Tsarina. She believed that he could cure her son, and he took advantage of that position, and it was a bad situation. You also see a couple of the Fabergé eggs. Now, those eggs were famous at the time. They're made of gold and precious jewels, and they were given to on political visits, and the royal family owned a lot of them. Then you see a picture of a bride, and this is typical for Russia. Everywhere you go, you see the brides in these various places, famous near the palaces and so on. Just like the vendors, you also see the brides. And it's on a bridge, and the bridge is over a long walk to the sea. Now, this walk is nothing but fountains, and they're all gold fountains, and they're spraying water, and this is all the way down to the edge of the sea. And by the edge of the sea is a fence, and we found this fence and found a picture that my grandmother had taken, again, of this particular fence, with her three daughters sitting in the back. They're hard to recognize, and my wife took a picture of the same fence and put me in the picture as well. So that fence was still there, and it's outside the Palace Plaisir. Now, Palace Plaisir was actually Peter the Great's palace. It was a much less ostentatious one than the other one. The other one is really not for living, only it's for entertaining. And even Putin, I think, gave a reception in that palace, but the Plaisir is the one where they used to live. It's much smaller, but very elaborate inside, and you see this one room. And then outside on the grounds, there's a tea house, a little tea house, very cute. And that brought memories also of the memoirs of my mother. That tea house must have been there at that time as well. And then we went back to the ships. Now, you see all the ships are in a row, side by side, and if you were, as we were, in the third ship, you had to go through the first two to get to the third one. But it all worked out very well. If the third one wanted to get out, the fourth one just pulled aside a little bit, and then it pulled right out, no problem at all. And then they closed up the gap. You see the next picture is of a typical lock, and we had 16 of those to go through from Petersburg to Moscow. Eventually, we ended up on the Volga. And then you see a sister ship in the distance. There was lots of these ships around. They were all actually reparations that Germany had to make to Russia in the form of building these ships, and there were lots of them being built, and the Russians got them for free. I mean, that's was a pretty raw deal. Well, then the next thing we did is we approached Kishi. Kishi is a little island in the middle of a lake, and there are a lot of wooden churches on there. Some of them were built in the 15th century, a long, long time ago, and they're made entirely of wood. And you see in one of the pictures a couple of girls doing handicraft work, and they're in this big house. And the house, the story that goes with it is that there were 5 sons living in this house, and to make a living you needed men around there. And unfortunately, after the war, none of the sons returned from the war, so the women had to move because they couldn't maintain this house. And there was a windmill there too, and I didn't take a picture of it, and the guide told us that the windmill was operated by two mules, or one strong woman. Can you imagine? Isn't that cute? One strong woman, or 2 mules. Now, when we got back to the ship, there was a special celebration, a typical Russian tea celebration, where they served tea. It was all beautifully put together. You can see that table, and you see the service crew and our hostess. These girls were all Russian. They were young. They were mostly very good looking, and they spoke German fluently. And I approached them and said, look, how many times have you been to Germany? And now Germany is not all that far from Russia, so I assumed that it was the case. And they all said none of them had ever been to Germany. All they did is they learned their German in their schools. Their schools must be fantastic because their German was excellent. Then we stopped in Uglitch, a little town, and there's a cloister in there, and there were monks. And 5 monks invited us into a church. On the walls were these icons, and it was very beautifully done inside. And then they performed and sang in this low Russian voice. It was just gorgeous. Some chorals. It was so moving, really, when we saw this, and the beautiful voices and the surroundings. It's something you have to experience. And I would love to go back and see it again. It was so wonderful. And then again, outside, you know the old story. You go from one island to another, and you have experiences. You see how the Russians really live, and they're not too well off. The poor things, they've had it rough all their lives. I mean, during the Tsar time, they were taken advantage of. The peasants had nothing to live on. The Tsars lived high on the hog. And then came the communists, and there were cliques as well, and the simple Russian had a very rough time. And now they have the mafia in control of Russia, and that's not any better. So I pity them. They really are in a tough situation. And for them to go from this kind of life that they have had for almost 100 years, or more than 100 years, to a democracy right off without any steps in between is ridiculous. It's never going to work. They need something more substantial. They need something, well, I won't say a dictatorship. Yeah, maybe it should be a benevolent dictatorship if there is such a thing, but there should be a transition. It is not going to work this way. Well, we then finally got near Moscow. You can see some of the views from the ship, and you see vendors again, and there was a little dog, and this was a live dog standing there begging, helping his father, you know, to beg. Kind of cute. Next you see the table where we were sitting. You're being assigned to a table. There are 2 other people there as well, and in the front you see the couple that we were teamed up with. Turned out to be a very nice couple from near Berlin. Then you see another performance. Always the musicians in one place or another were doing something, and sometimes at one time they even had a little theatrical performance. And when we arrived in Moscow, we again used the ship as a hotel and spent a couple of days in Moscow. We went to Red Square. We saw the Kremlin, and of course we saw the tomb where Lenin is buried or presented, but we didn't go inside. I think they were doing some remodeling. Maybe they remodeled him. And then we went to the gum department store, which is nearby. It's a huge department store on a par with a Macy's or something of that nature. And it's quite full, and it's quite modern and quite up to date, by the way. And just for the hell of it, I placed Yuta, my wife, in front of Fredericks of Hollywood in Moscow at the Gum department store. Now, isn't that a change? I'm sure it is. Again, outside were the brides, and you can't escape them. I mean, they're as common as the vendors. Then we went to see the Dumas, where the political decisions are made. That's the parliament. We saw an old cannon. Now, that certainly was really old. And then we saw a huge bell. It's like the Liberty Bell, only the crack is a lot more substantial. In this case, it's much bigger than any bell I've ever seen, but a good portion of the bell is broken out. Obviously, the foundry that made this bell this must be a very tough job, and they didn't succeed when they wouldn't throw it out. So it's supposed to be the largest bell. And then we went into a shopping center in Moscow, a nice shopping street close to traffic, and I saw for the first time these pointed shoes. I was so taken by it that I had to take a picture of the girls wearing them, or the shoes. Some of them pointed back up again. I mean, they were really pointed. I wouldn't want to get kicked by one of those. And then I'm showing you three typical Moscow subway stations. Now, these subway stations are ornate. I would say they're overdone, way overdone, but anyway, they're famous. And when you look at them and you see how precious they are and how much effort and money went into those subway stations, you'll be quite amazed. One of them had murals, and the murals were not just on the sides, they were also on the ceiling. And they started with the early days of Ivan the Terrible, and they went on from there all the way to the present time. And of course, there was a period during the war where Germany didn't fare too well in their judgment, and the mural was not too complimentary, but they managed to keep us away from that. I managed to get away with an excuse because I had a feeling there was something there when it went on, but they made a turnaround at that point. They were so tactful. I was always amazed by the Russians and their tact and their consideration and their kindness. They were really, I was very, very much impressed. And my overall impression of this entire trip is that I would go back any time. I enjoyed it tremendously, and I felt quite at home, and I thought the people were wonderful, which only makes you know that no matter where you go, people are wonderful. Some politicians usually screw it up. Well, don't let me get into this one. So I'll stop for now. So I hope you enjoyed this little show. So long.